Okay, we are recording. All right, welcome, folks. Appreciate it. Appreciate your coming today. See, I'm just getting myself a little organized here. I have that as 2:15, 2:16. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to BDCC's Resiliency Programs, the Business Resiliency Programs webinar series. We could call this episode 5, and it's April 17th, 2020. So we're living in a strange time. The Valley has a forecast of 3 to 6 inches tonight for this evening. I think it was last Friday. I was looking out the window. The sun was shining. It was 39 degrees and snow was falling. I felt like it was a little bit like the Upside Down in Stranger Things. So this has been an interesting April for all of us. On this day in 1387, Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales characters began their pilgrimage to Canterbury, according to scholars. In 1961, on this day, 1,400 Cuban exiles landed in Bay of Pigs in a doomed attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro. On this day in 2011, Game of Thrones premiered on HBO. And then in 1970, Paul McCartney's first solo album, McCartney, was released. And on this day, 2,196,109 cases of COVID-19 have been reported globally. 672,303 in the United States, 671 in Vermont, with 58 in Windham County. And this is according to the Johns Hopkins coronavirus map. On this day, April 17th, 2020, we are once again going to try to understand how we can help each other navigate through this extraordinary time. The first week of this webinar series, I do this every week. I kind of think back to where we were. We were attempting to get some footing. The second week, on March 27th, some programs were released. The CARES Act had just recently been passed, and we started to see the emergence of the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL program. The third week, we focused on, okay, so these programs are out. How do we access them? How do we get to them, apply to them? And then last week on April 10th, we really got kind of technical. We had Deb Rudrio from the Vermont Small Business Development Center really dig into some ways to think about how to access them and answer some real specific questions. So this week, well, we've recently learned that PPP and EIDL have been exhausted. So they're no longer taking applications for either of those programs. And I saw Chris Saunders join the session. So I'm hopeful that Chris can give us some insights into what's being worked on. So we'll get to that in a moment. So I just wanted to sort of set the stage with some opening remarks. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah, as we always do, so that Sarah can sort of go over the ground rules and talk to us a little bit about Zoom.
Thanks. So I think this is probably week 5 that we've been doing this. So hopefully we all know how to use Zoom, but just some reminders. Everyone is muted, and Archie and I are the only ones that have the ability to unmute you. That's purely just to cut down on background noise. So just so you're aware, if you feel like your unmute button is not working. Please, if you can, go to the participant list, and if you haven't already, just rename yourself with your affiliation. You don't have to, but that's helpful for us and for everyone else on the call, just to see where people are coming from. And lastly, if you are on the phone only, there's the raise your hand function, which is *9. And for everyone that are on their computers, If you are in the participant list, at the bottom of that list is the raise hand function, and we'll be using that a little later on in the presentation. So that's it for me.
So, thank you. I'd like to try to find any of our federal delegation representatives to lean to see if there's any insights that can be provided.
This year.
I saw.
Yep, you're unmuted, Chris. Chris Saunders, where are you at? Can you hear us?
Sorry. Yeah, I hadn't turned off my mute button on my own.
Okay.
So we are actively discussing Senator Leahy. Hang on one second.
Working from home.
Co-workers.
Yeah, every day it's take your kid to work day. So Senator Leahy was named to the President's Council on Reopening the Government yesterday. He was on the phone with the President yesterday, talked to the Vice President today, and has actively been talking with his colleagues about how to proceed. And I think there is broad agreement that billions, hundreds of billions of more is needed for the PPP and EIDL. And so we are not yet at finalized numbers. There was this back and forth last week about how to proceed. I think that there's differing perspectives on what all to include in a new package, that it's really kind of a redux of cares. We still have some hospitals that are days away from running out of money, and there's a need to make sure that they can keep their doors open. We have people who cannot put food on their table. So there's been conversations about immediate influxes into the Three Squares program in Vermont, formerly known as food stamps. I know we have a lot of banks that are, or a lot of businesses based on the 40 or so that I've talked to today that say, we just need to move forward, we need to get money into the program. Please set all the other stuff aside. I think there'll be an agreement this weekend on what exactly to do. Congress is, the Senate's back in session on Monday. So that's the next window to vote on something. And I think it's Senator Leahy's hope that we can all agree that on the basic priorities that need to be voted on and moved through, and then set aside other pieces. We've been on calls with the SBA and the Bankers Association about how things are proceeding. And I think one of the important pieces of guidance is if you have not yet filed your application, don't wait to do so just because the program doesn't have money. Banks still have the ability to do all the review that they can on their end to get prepared to send their queue of applications into SBA. Many folks have already had their information sent to SBA, but don't wait just because your bank is saying, "Hey, no funding right now. There's a pause in the program." So that's, I think, the main tip from our office, and a message of stay tuned about what's to come. And I'll be here for the hour, so can answer questions. But those are the big headlines.
Chris, have you heard about whether or not they're considering any tweaks to the programs in any way, or is it? Yeah, go ahead.
No, absolutely. I think that's been an important piece as well. So last week, the McConnell bill was just straight funding for new money for the program. Senator Schumer proposed a number of reforms. Senator Leahy has reforms that he's suggested. These are things along the lines of adding eligibility. We have a host of different nonprofit groups that are excluded. We have issues with VITA not being able to lend to the full amount that they could normally lend to. So any VITA loan has been capped at $250,000. That's the Vermont Economic Development Authority. Sorry to jump in the acronyms. And then there are really some significant questions for restaurants, hotels, tourism industry businesses that have been forced to close. And so I think there's purchase around the idea of, can you give flexibility on the 8 weeks forgiveness period to let a business decide when that would apply, or to extend it either to 12 weeks, give some flexibility there, as well as around clarity needed on how to bring back employees, whether the funding can be used to provide a hazard pay benefit to an employee, or as a bonus, some sort of retention payment to get them back to work, so that a business isn't on the hook for the loan at the end of the 30 days. So I can't, definitively give you, here are all the provisions that are going to be in it. But a lot of that has been discussed. One thing that did make it into Schumer's proposal that Senator Leahy wrote was adding eligibility for agriculture businesses under the EIDL program. That had been an issue. I think there's agreement that should move forward, but obviously all this is contingent on getting more funding.
And I see a question, Chris. Would PPP changes be only for those applications that come with the new funding, or with applications that came previously as well?
I don't see how it could be anything but retroactive for anybody. It wouldn't make sense to penalize a business that was able to get a loan early and only provide relief to those that are going forward. So that's our intention, is to be to write things retroactively.
Okay. And I'm only going to do like another one of these. We can jump to questions a little bit later, but CNN has reported that, this is in the chat, that SBA will not be keeping the queue for You're muted.
Oh, hold on. I have to unmute him.
I lost him.
Sorry about that. We are hearing from SBA locally in Vermont that they are keeping the queue. We'll try to get some clarity on how exactly that's being handled. I think my point was specifically that banks are keeping their own queue for applications that have not yet been sent. So they have the authority to make some decisions on how to handle the incoming business for them. But I'll try and get clarity from SBA while we're on the chat to see about what they're saying with regards to that.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Chris. Sarah, have you been able, is Erica on the call, or anyone else? Maybe Rebecca?
I didn't see them.
Okay, all right. Okay. I saw Representative Tolino. There you are. It's so hard to in the Brady Bunch view. It's sometimes hard to find.
It totally is. Thank you. And I came in as Chris was starting to talk, so if I repeat anything that Chris said, I apologize. I know. So we know, and Adam was on a call yesterday. We heard this, that Vermont was actually third in the country per capita on getting access to the early stages of the PPP funding, and that there's 853 million that has been approved that will be hitting in various degrees of timing over the next 10 or so days. I don't have anything to add to what Chris offered about the next phase of funding, other than the obvious hope that they find a path forward quickly. On the queue issue, the Vermont Bankers Association is in the process of trying to figure out how they can hold a queue so that they, even if the SBA process isn't formally doing it, that they can be ready to support Vermonters getting quicker access. And so that is something that is being worked on right now as we speak. For us in the state legislature, sort of at the state level, the unemployment insurance challenges have been, I think, probably the #1 issue over the last couple weeks, with increasing levels of insane frustration. Molly Burke reported yesterday that she had talked to former rep Daryl Pillsbury, who told her that he called 700 times in one day. I know my son had tried, I think, 50 to 100 times yesterday to reach, and it was his day to do so. And so we know that that this is not working. The governor acknowledged on Wednesday in a article that he had been so focused on the health side of things, that he had sort of underestimated the degree of challenge internally. And the legislature has been encouraging him to add resources, because we've been hearing, frankly, from our communities, the desperation and the fear and frustration rising. Most recently in his press conference today, they talked about how they expect a substantial number of cases to be resolved by Tuesday, that they are bringing in even more staff, so they'll have an extra 100 people on phone lines by midweek next week. And I haven't seen a formal confirmation of it, but supposedly he said that if things aren't moving by Sunday, that he's going to authorize a sort of early release of some funds to people to get money in their pockets while they clear the backlog of cases. That some of this is internal to old systems that are creating long-term challenges. Some of it is anti-fraud protections that were built in and are being adhered to by staff who remember previous crises where that turned out in the long run to be complicated and problematic, and they're working internally to address that. Some of that is just simply the call volume, that just the number of people calling, like Daryl, like my son, calling over 100 times, 200 times trying to get through, means that no one can get through. And so there's this sort of fundamental problem of what is individually the right thing for you to do is in aggregate a real problem for a system that's completely overwhelmed. But it does sound like there's an expectation in the next 2 to 4 days to have substantial improvements in the system and massive investments in resources.
Thank you, Rush and Celino. Trying to see, do we see any other winter delegation representation?
Are any other representatives on the line? If you could just raise your hand virtually if you have something to share.
Okay. While we're looking for that, Chris had posted some figures from the SBA, national approvals, and then that loans have been made to nearly 7,000 Vermont businesses, and there's a PDF that he's referenced there as well. Okay. All right, I think I'm going to move on.
All right, Archie, can I just add one piece? I just forgot to mention that there is the pandemic unemployment assistance line. That information is available at the Department of Labor website, and that will and also help to address the self-employed population and how the rollout is happening of that in the next few days.
Great. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so today the focus is going to be essentially it's a panel discussion featuring 5 businesses and how they've navigated the relief programs thus far. I had a moment of pause earlier this week in thinking about this structure, because we just found out that PPP and EIDL were exhausted, and would this make any sense? But what I realized is, you know what, folks are working hard to get more funding to these programs, to tweak them a bit. So I think it's still relevant. I think it'll be I think it'll be helpful for people to understand and listen to other folks as they work through this. And I've learned that oftentimes the best learning happens peer-to-peer. So I think listening to these seasoned business folks might be helpful. So the folks who are going to be helping me with this, we have Bill Daly from the Vermont Country Store. Bill has been the president and CEO of the Vermont Country Deli. Sorry about that, Bill. Where are you? For the last 12 years, he's a member of the Board of Trustees for the Brattleboro Memorial Hospital, member of the Board of Trustees for the Brattleboro's Walk-in Clinic. He has degrees from Miami University, and I think that's probably in Ohio, Miami in Ohio, and Rochester Institute of Technology. And Bill is also, interestingly, a certified public accountant. Also, Chris Gagne from Hermit Thrush Brewery after leaving a social work career in Philadelphia. Chris co-founded Hermit Thrush Brewery in 2014 with Avery Schwank. Chris leads finance, product development, and market positioning for Hermit Thrush. And Hermit Thrush is soon going to launch a beer web store for Vermonters and is currently in the middle of some R&D, thinking about pivoting toward industrial ethanol production for hand sanitizer. So I'm hopeful he'll give us a little insight into that. Also is Julie Lineberger from WheelPad. Julie is the president and founder of WheelPad in Wilmington, Vermont. WheelPad is an eco-friendly, accessible bathroom and bedroom that can attach to an existing home temporarily to assist families in being together while figuring out long-term solutions. She's also the owner of Line Sync Architecture, also in Wilmington. We also have Mike Costco from the Putney General Store in Phoenix Gifts. Mike and Kim Costco are the owners and relatively new owners at that of the Putney General Store in Phoenix Gifts, which is right upstairs of the store in Putney, Vermont. Before that, Mike and Kim were in a band. No, that's a joke. That's a joke. I don't see any smiles. Okay, there's a band called anyway. So they ran a successful general store in Massachusetts. We're grateful that Mike and Kim made the move from Massachusetts to here to Vermont. And also Ellen Cappy from Mocha Joe's Roasting and Mocha Joe's Cafe. Ellen and Pierre started over 20 years ago, and I'm going to steal, I've stolen directly from their website. Mocha Joe's Cafe remains an iconic downtown business. Mocha Joe's Roasting Company now has over 100 wholesale customers throughout the Northeast and is committed to the science and craft of great coffee. So I want to welcome those folks. And I need to look for, Julie has a real limited time window. So I'm going to look for Julie first so that, yay. Hi, Julie.
I was going to put Matt and Kim is the name of the band.
It's Matt and Kim.
Matt and Kim. Matty Johnson grew up in Whitingham, which is out here in our Deerfield Valley.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's great.
They're highly successful.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, never mind. I'm pausing because somebody's going to go boomer to me. I'm not a boomer though. I'm not. I'm a Gen Xer. Julie, I know you've got limited time, so we'll follow the format. But just if you wouldn't mind taking a few moments, obviously to give us I gave a very, very brief overview, but what would be interesting to know is, you've been working on WheelPad for a little while, about 5 years now. I would characterize it as still sort of in growth stage. It's still an early stage firm. This pandemic hits. You've had to make some assessments. You've had to try to figure out, what you're going to do and how you're going to keep it going. So I'd love to understand what your thought process was. How did you finally decide, okay, well, I'm going to go for some of these programs, or I'm not going to go for these programs, because I actually don't know exactly what you ended up trying to do.
Well, it's very interesting because, we started production 3 years ago. And throughout this time, my other business, Line Sync Architecture, has really been supporting WheelPad. We got a veto loan for WheelPad that we've been working against. But I really had Line Sync Architecture supporting a lot of the WheelPad's work. So then you turn to the end of last year, where we had Line Sync Architecture had a huge project ready to go to do the next $33 million project for Peak Resorts up at Mount Snow, when Vail Resorts bought Mount Snow. And then what we had staffed up for and not marketed for another big job for, all of a sudden we have teeny tiny little jobs to keep us going, but not this big job and not the resources to support WheelPad any longer. So through that process, we were just barely holding on. And then we hit COVID-19. And all of a sudden, WheelPad becomes an essential business because we have now placing 2 wheel pads. One was placed 2 weeks ago. Another is going to be placed hopefully next week for people whose families want to get them out of nursing homes where there's a COVID-19 threat.
Oh, interesting.
So it's
Okay.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden I am in the position that I have to manufacture 4 new wheel pads immediately, and LineSync has to do the drawing. So now wheel pads helping out LineSync. It's quite a bizarre turn of events. However, very early on in the COVID, as soon as I heard about the EDIL, I applied for it. I haven't received.
Without hesitation, like you just knew that you were going to need some sort of funding and capitalization, so you
Well,
jumped right in.
absolutely, because I wanted to keep my staff on because I've got an amazing staff.
Okay.
So we've been keeping them on and depleting our savings. So to keep them on further, I applied immediately for EDIL and then for the PPP. And then also Wilmington, as part of our 1%, we have a revolving loan fund. So I just applied to everything. And I figured if I didn't need it, I could repay it early, give it out to somebody else. If I did need it, at least I could keep my staff on. I haven't received anything from EDIL other than a confirmation that I applied. I did receive my PPP loan in my bank account with Brattleboro Savings and Loan on Wednesday, which made it so I can meet payroll today, which is very, very exciting, without going further into debt. On other way, the PPP loan is, if you use it for payroll and utilities and rent, there's a lot of that will be turned into a grant, so we've been told. So I just jumped on it as soon as possible, and hearing the news that came out yesterday that those funds have already been depleted, that was not a surprise to me. I think the powers that be underestimated quite a bit the devastation that this is taking on small businesses.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think I'm gonna bounce around a little bit, and Julie, but I'm sure we'll come back to you. Thank you so much for that overview.
Sure.
Sarah, I've lost my place. Where are we? Who's next?
Bill.
Bill Daly. Bill, are you ready to be put on the spot?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so same question. Just trying to understand, the pandemic hits. If you could give us just sort of a high-level overview of the operation. I know you also sort of have an arm's length relationship with another business, Vermont Gelato. So you've probably got a lot of things going on and have to consider. So I'd love to hear your thinking around how you came to deciding whether or not you'd access some of these programs.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. We were going along. Actually, this is from January through April is our busiest season. We have Vermont Country Deli at Mount Snow, which is a booth up there. We also have Vermont Gelato, which is a separate corporation. We also have the market, which is next door to Vermont Country Deli, and then we have the deli. And Mount Snow had closed pretty much mid-March prior to any of the PPP program coming on, and we had to close that. And basically, those who were working up there were it was end of the season. The market and the deli, though, had we have considerable payroll each month, and we have a head count of about 40 people at mid-March. We're now down to 20, and we received PPP monies this week, and I'm still working through how forgiveness works and a number of other things there. But we were able to make payroll this week. We were able to do that. We had furloughed some people that were risk, I'll call them. So they're pretty much not coming, and we had a few people that felt it very risky to stay in business. So we allowed them to leave they filed unemployment and that. We furloughed them basically, so they're still getting benefits and that.
Right.
This all culminates, and about I had been taking out loans for the last 2 weeks in March to cover payrolls, and I was the choice was either we're going to have to close down and lay everybody off, or try to get these loans. So I applied for the loan. It was around April 3rd or so, and it was 10 days, and they approved it. And they approved it on April 3rd. It was 10 days for them to process it through Bradwell Savings and Loan. My piece was that when I applied for the loan, I had cash flows, I had income statements, balance sheets, everything the bank really needed to make a decision on the loan, as if it were going to be a normal loan. And then I added payrolls and that kind of thing that I was able to put together. My hesitancy right now is with the loan forgiveness, because the rules are so vague. That's the first piece. The second piece is I just read that the forgiveness is on the federal tax returns, it's not considered income, but because Vermont is a static conformity state, that the legislature has to rule on whether it is income or not on your state returns. So I'm still looking for the answer to that question.
Okay. I don't know if Chris heard that. Static conformity state. I wrote it down. We can go back to that. We can go back to that. But
anyway, this week we received the loan, and we were able to pay payroll this week. So we're happy, and I'm happy that we do that. Now we're looking at our income is about 80% of what it used to be. So we're at about 20%. And
wow. Okay.
it's hard to hire somebody to do nothing.
Right.
And it's hard and it's also hard when the unemployment has, you're getting your unemployment as you normally would, and then another $600
Yep.
on top of that. It's hard to compete with that from bringing people on. So we're working through plans on how to bring people in as the economy starts to get some traction and bring people in.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I mean, it sounds like the bulk of your considerations was around helping your people. Helping.
That's correct.
Me payroll essentially. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I think I'm going to turn to Chris Gagne of Hermit Thrush Brewery now. Chris, same question. You're in the beverage manufacturing business, so it'd be great to hear. What has the impact been for you, and what have you done to sort of mitigate it in access programs?
Hi, Artie. Thanks. So we have been relatively closed in terms of our bar and grilled cheese service since March 13th. We just really felt like our tourism component is very high, and so that weekend thing kind of started getting real. We kind of felt like it was important to get defense.
Chris,
so
Sarah, should we switch to the phone? I'm sorry, hold on, Chris.
Can you hear me or no?
It's going in and out, and should we switch to your dial-up?
Yeah, video doesn't matter that much. Why don't I switch to phone?
Okay.
Okay, you should be good.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, this is good?
Yep.
Okay, sweet. Sorry about that. So Yeah, so we closed to the public pretty early and really just switched to takeout beer, which is not very much, especially because we're sort of focused on a distributed market rather than you know, having as dedicated a local following. You know, we're less of a place to hang out at. So we, you know, wholesale is certainly down as well. Kegs were about 20 or 30% of our wholesale business, and certainly all the bars on the Northeast coast are pretty closed right now. We are part of grocery supply chain essential side stuff, so fortunately our cans are still doing okay at wholesale. So that was sort of our initial key reaction, was just closing mostly to the public and kind of shifting focus on production. We pretty quickly were researching and interested in IDLE and PPP, and we're just sort of, you know, attending this call and getting advice from all of our local finance advisors and bankers and stuff. We bank at BSNL, and so we, as soon as PPP started taking applications, we definitely applied for that, and because of the possibility of forgiveness, we're pretty sure we were going to take that from the start. The IDLE we've done the initial application for, but haven't progressed any further, and the PPP loan we were approved for and deposited yesterday. So, you know, I echo the payroll concerns, and we definitely, you know, I think we, as a distributed business, I don't know how you guys all work with your cash flow, but we're sort of trying to work a couple or a few weeks out. So we fortunately had a little bit of breathing room, but now payroll is secured for the next little bit. And then pretty much as soon as we felt like we had sufficiently financed our short-term panic, we shifted gears towards creative solutions and pivots. One of the things we're working on right now is I believe early next week we'll be able to launch our web store for Vermont beer shipping. So we'll be able to send beer via UPS to Vermont doorsteps. And that's always been a permit that breweries could get, but it's never really seemed all that relevant until now. The Department of Liquor Control offers that permit to breweries and wineries. Yeah, and just, you know, real quick, whole website redesign, just used Squarespace e-commerce. It's fast and easy, and had some photos taken by Little Pond Digital, and just, you know, got it ready to go. It's not perfect, but it's ready to go live soon, and that's what matters. And then I guess the other pivot we've been working on more recently is looking at industrial alcohol production for hand sanitizer, because there's been a number of shortages of sanitizing material, and that basically the international ethanol market is drying up a bit. So we're hoping to partner with Saxon's River and potentially also other local Vermont distillers to, you know, help join the hospital supply chain. And yeah, to the effect, just mentioning to Julie about the wheel pad thing, that makes total sense to be kind of focusing on a unit that you can offer healthcare right now. So, you know, I think the only real things that I'd probably add to the PPP and the IDLE stuff is that it was very helpful that we had our books ready and finances in a sort of presentable status already. I'm very grateful that I was lucky enough to get our corporate taxes done early this year, and so, you know, 2019 tax information was already ready to hit click on send. And then as soon as I knew that I had any information to my lenders, I was sure to be the squeaky wheel multiple times a day. But that's the main stuff I have to add, I think, at this point, unless there's other specific questions. I guess the other one of the thing I'd add as a social worker is just make sure that you're taking time for personal care. This is a marathon, not a sprint, so take care of yourself.
Thank you, Chris. So what I've heard thus far, before we turn it over to Mike and Alan, I've heard two companies talk about making some pivots with Julie and Chris. Bill has talked about some payroll his primary concern being payroll and what he's done to try to mitigate those concerns as best as he can. Chris just mentioned the importance from a self-care perspective, so that's really appreciated. And to highlight Chris's last note about really keeping your books up to date, I think those messages are, that's why we do something like this, because if one person can walk away with a note from this session that maybe says, well, shoot, maybe I should be keeping my books better up to date, then I think that's valuable. So Krista, if you have something specific you would like to ask, I would encourage you to do that in the chat. I think I'm going to try to turn to Ellen from Mocha Joe's. You said you were having some technical issues, so let's see if we can hear you.
You should be unmuted. Ellen, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Go ahead, Ellen. You have an interesting perspective because you have the cafe, which is a very local Main Street retail business, and then you have your wholesale business. So I think it would be helpful to hear your thinking about navigating the relief programs and what motivated you to do that.
Yeah, I think, for the cafe, which had a lot of, has a lot of part-time workers and we had to close the cafe for safety reasons quite early. So it made sense to close it and have people collect unemployment because the unemployment situation is very attractive, I think, for hourly workers. And but at the roasting shop, we looked into the PPP because we have more full-time salaried, higher salaries there, and it made sense to try to take advantage of the PPP there. And for both companies, we applied for the EIDL, not knowing what was going to happen. And so far, it's gone into space. I don't know, has anybody else said that they received the EIDL $10,000 disaster relief?
Yeah, I have not heard of any funds hitting the ground. I've interacted with one business yesterday that received an approval, but anything related to, in the SBA portal, anything related to closing is still, as they described it, still grayed out. So there's still some ambiguity there.
I think that is a really important piece for the cafe, is because the PPP didn't really work mathematically for that business, but the cafe needs that extra to pay off bills that were already accrued, etc. Hoping, but there's there's some kind of faith involved in all of this because we're not quite sure, what will turn into a grant, what won't, and all that.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Ellen. And Julie, I know you have to take off. I want to throw it back to you before you sign off to see if there's any parting words that you might have for folks.
Yeah, I really agree with Chris, because our books were up to date, which is something that's such a pain all the time, and it's easy to say I'll do it later. We were able to be, as the BSNL people said, we were the first PPP loan that closed through Brattleboro Savings and Loan. Two is that just from when I've started both businesses, it's just I take any advice, anyone who wants to give me advice, an idea or whatever, that can tell me that what's worked for them, what didn't work for them, has helped me. So sometimes that's very, very helpful. And I try to take advantage of absolutely every opportunity that's out there. And then if it turns out I don't need it, that's okay. I can pass it on to the next person.
Okay.
So thank you all. Good luck. Sorry, I have to jump.
Yeah. Thank you, Julie. Appreciate it. Mike Costco from the Putney General Store. Are you on the line?
I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you. So you are operating a very Main Street business, and you have employees, same considerations as others. Can you tell us a little bit about what you had to consider and what action you've taken?
Well, yeah, we've seen, moving into January and February is kind of a natural slower months, and then the virus hits, and I was still in the cleaning up the business period because it had been run by volunteers and keeping it open for a couple of years, so there was a lot of changes. So we've just this payroll, which hits today, is the first one that I've really been able to affect. So I cut payroll by, I think it was 40%, and which helps. But business is down about that much too, so we're just scraping by. So I got involved. Everybody was giving advice. There was all kinds of people who were sending links of where to find information. So I kind of stuck with RT here, and I've been on these calls from the beginning. So from then, that must have been, if this is the 5th week, which time has passed pretty quickly, I applied for EDL and PPP as quickly as I could. So I'm approved for both, but nothing's happened yet. Although I'm seeing in the comments that possible funds will get automatically deposited without too much conversation.
Okay. So you immediately saw a need to access capital, and it was probably, I'm assuming you're echoing Bill's sentiments about needing to meet payroll obligations.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I took over the business and it was only minimally profitable, a tiny bit of profit when I took over. So I knew there was a lot of efficiencies I could make. So I hadn't paid myself yet, and that still might be a long way off.
Yeah.
So every week I'm kind of drawing down my own money.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think I'm going to lean a little bit on Chris Saunders again, if that's okay. I've just been keeping my eye on a few of the chat postings, and it seems like there's some people, the folks who we just heard from were fairly quick to act. They applied. It sounds like they applied early. There may be some folks that also applied early, but they just they haven't heard anything from either PPP or EIDL. I know in last week's call session, and I can try to find it. There's a number to call. But have you, Chris, heard about the status of those people who haven't heard anything, and if there's a plan to get the word out to folks?
Yeah, this on EIDL specifically, the communication, as Adam notes in the chat, has really been, it's like things have gone into a black box. The Atlanta office of SBA handles disaster applications, and they have done, I think, a very poor job of communicating around the program. There haven't been automated responses going out, aside for some that have specifically noted a change in the additional in the $10,000 grant, so that it would be $1,000 per employee. So that's very frustrating and distressing. The SBA office in Vermont has no ability to check on the status of an application. And so really the limited opportunity has been to wait in the line of hundreds of people to talk to somebody on the phone who then hasn't shared much information. So Idle is not working as intended. I think in Senator Leahy's mind, and he's really pushing on SBA. We know they've been completely overwhelmed. They've received more than 4 million applications, and the design of the program by submitting a minimal amount of information to SBA and then having them review and decide what amount of business would be approved for puts a lot of pressure on SBA. They had been saying, at the outset when this all started, 14 days to review, 5 days to disperse. They knew that would slip a little bit, but they even haven't been really meeting those best of intentions. And I know the SBA office locally has been frustrated that there hasn't been a subsequent.
Chris, I'm sorry, you were muted.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So SBA has been frustrated locally that there hasn't been the appropriate amount of correspondence to businesses to let them know what's going on.
Okay.
On PPP, I did get an update. I checked in with SBA while we were on the call, and here is what they have said, that if a bank got a GP loan number, and then funds are reserved for that loan, and there may have been some that were submitted, and in the process of getting the loan, which was then the money run out. So those that have a number but were not funded will be able to will be. That's the queue that SBA is keeping. If something was submitted and didn't get a number back from SBA, then our understanding is that the bank will need to resubmit that application. So, everybody is overwhelmed. But I think Chris's point earlier about being in regular contact with your banker is really critical here, and talking to them about where you are in the process, what if any additional information is needed, and what they are doing specific to your application is essential.
Chris, thank you. Thank you very much. I want to toss it to Chris Gagné. I think he has some points to make. And then after Chris, I'm going to toss it to David Heiler. David's been posting some of his information, which I think is useful because, David's not a small operation. He's not a huge operation either in the SBA definition of small business. And he's also had some lack of communication from the SBA. So first, Chris Gagné.
Yeah, sorry, I just had a few follow-up notes and details. So one, I would say that as a PPP recipient, I'll also add the detail that as part of the closing documents that I think are standard, we agreed to not receive any funds from any other iterations of payroll protection programs. So that to me sort of suggests that there may be additional rounds of this in the future that we would not be eligible for, but certainly we were under fast stress, so it still made sense to go with this because there's no information about the other stuff. So there might be other opportunities. The other thing I'd add is that I think in addition to just thinking about managing payroll and stuff like that, the idle in particular, which is going to be slower money and is more geared towards, helping the longevity of the thing rather than the PPP was sort of a quick implementation kind of thing. I think I would really recommend that people think creatively about your idle loan and what changes you may need to do to your overall business model in the context of post-emergent COVID, because there may be some changes to general culture, to how business runs in general. I think online sales and delivery are obviously, an emerging market that's going to continue to grow. So I would just sort of anecdotally urge people to not just think about paying your bills and financing your short term, but also think about what business model shifts you may need financing for, or staff time and labor to implement, or stuff like that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. David, you've been actively posting about your experience. Could you maybe share that verbally?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I probably have more questions than answers, actually, but we applied for the EIDL really early, back when it was an application that took about 2 days to fill out. I don't know if anybody else experienced that, but I mean, it was personal financial statements and bank statements, tax returns, all that stuff had to be uploaded to the site. So we did it way back when.
Yeah, before March 30th then, before March 30th.
Yeah, and then they came out with, they said you have to reapply with the new format, which took about 20 minutes, you know, to no avail. And again, we had to, I got an email. The only thing I got from them was an email saying, go ahead and apply for the $10,000, which we did. And, you know, obviously no word on that yet. And we also applied for the PPP. Our bank, which was People's, and I haven't seen anybody, I've seen a lot of BSNL approvals. Congratulations, all of you. People's let us know we were approved last Friday and then said the paperwork's coming, the paperwork's coming, the paperwork's coming, the paperwork's coming. And now he doesn't return my calls. But I have faith, so we'll see what happens with that.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know if anybody else is with People's and has received their money yet or not, but that would be a question I had. And I want to speak to Chris's point as well. You know, for us, you know, we have 70 employees, so the PPP obviously made the most sense for us at the restaurant, and we applied for the EIDL at the campground as well as the restaurant. But you know, we're looking at when this is all over, reinventing ourselves, because now is the chance to do that. I mean, for those of us in the small business world, I mean, does the way we did things make the most sense when we reopen? Or is it time to look at a new model? Is it time to look at what makes sense for us? And I think that's where we're at. So.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And that's actually my percolating thoughts for, I don't know about next, but potentially next week, is just trying to highlight some folks who have pivoted either directly in response and to be supportive of the pandemic, or pivoted, you know, to a, you know, vertical or something, you know, something related to what it is that they currently do. So more to come on that as it develops a bit more. Okay, I think, you know, we're coming up on an hour. As I've said in the past, we are monitoring the group chat, so we, you know, try to get back to folks who have had questions that we haven't had a chance to answer. As Chris has stated, the federal folks are diligently working on the next round. And as he also stated, it makes sense to maybe, you know, try to get in those queues as early as possible if you haven't tried to access either one of the programs. We will be keeping ourselves up to date on any of the programmatic changes and criteria. So we'll be pushing that out as we come to learn what those might be. The liaisons who you met last week will also be reaching out with, you know, any of the changes as they do their ongoing outreach efforts. Chris Gagne from Hermit Thrush just reiterated to get your books in order. But I think before we wrap it up, I'd like to just briefly circle back to the panelists, thank them very much, and ask if there's just any last words you'd like to highlight. So let's, Julie's already left, so let's go to Chris, if he's available.
Yeah, hold on.
This Chris?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Chris? Yes, great. One other thing I just wanted to point a little attention to is the Main Street Lending Program. I'm not in the loop about this yet, but the Fed has announced another business lending program that's focused on, it's kind of worded ambiguously so far, and there's not much detail, but it sounds like an equity type investment in businesses that are looking to move forward in you know come out of on the other side of COVID in a new or different or better way. So I think it can be used for repair and restore kind of approaches, but I think it's also worded somewhat to address business change and needing to finance specific business changes or equipment or systems or whatever. And I think it's a 30-year amortization. So kind of an interesting thing. I would keep an eye on it. I don't have any real information to share, but if that, the minimum loan size, I believe, is $1 million, so definitely not necessarily right for every business, but if you have pivots that may cost capital, it may be appropriate.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. And before I jump to Bill Daly, Chris Saunders, I don't know, do you have any comments you want to share on that Main Street Lending Program?
Yeah, so I was talking with emailing the Treasury Department late last night about it. They are still gathering comments and expect to put out regulations early next week. It is going to be similarly flown through existing lenders. And as of yesterday, the Vermont bankers did not know which of them might be interested in participating. And I think it'll depend on what each bank can do and what market it is looking at. This is also a window that is, I think, set up because SBA programs are generally limited to businesses of 500 or fewer, trying to provide some access to capital for larger businesses. So we're looking, we've been talking with them about what the rules are going to look like, who can participate. We certainly have institutions, both nonprofits and businesses of that size in Vermont. But I think it's going to be an opportunity for a specific type of business. And so while trying to get that right, we also really want to make sure there's access for the person that needs, $10,000 to get through to summer, just as much as somebody that needs a couple $1 million to reorient their business.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Chris. Bill Daly, any last thoughts on this topic? Oh, yep, you're unmuted.
One thing is just keep your relationships up with your bankers. We tend to, I try to keep them meet with them quarterly, explain where we are, what our needs are going forward. That relationship helped when this came on to get this thing through quickly. Keep the records up to date and develop your relationship with your banker. That's what I.
Bill, can you? I know we're over time, but can you? What do you mean when you meet with them quarterly? What are you trying to express to them?
I have a budget that I have every year, and I go through it at annual, and then on a quarterly basis, I review it with them where we are and where we are with the financial statements.
Okay.
What capital projects I'm thinking of coming up in the current year, and how I'm going to fund that, and where our cash flow is. And so it's a conversation, and it's keeping lines open so that if I do need to get a loan, they know where I am, they know where I stand, and it's very easy to update them and apply for loans. And in this case, it helped quite considerably because they knew where I was. They had a lot of my key information so that it helped with the loan process. The only curveball was when they changed the SBA changed the loan application, so we had to resubmit it, the next day or something like that. So
yeah, okay, all right, thank you, appreciate that. Ellen, you're unmuted. Any parting thoughts?
Well, I did like what David Heiler was saying about being able to really review where you're at. I think part of the entrepreneurial spirit is, to be able to make changes and to be creative. So I think now's the time to be creative. That's why I would leave on.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Ellen. And Mike Costco, Putney General Store.
Hold on 1 second.
We're trying to unmute you. Hold on 1 second. There you go. You're unmuted, Mike.
Good. My relationship with my banker definitely helped. I go there every day or almost, making daily deposits. So they know me pretty well, and I'm new to town, so everybody's very helpful. So that got through. And I don't know if you saw in the comments, but as we were talking, I got the email from them to review the documents for the PPP.
Oh,
So that might be happening for me right now.
great. Okay, very good. All right, good to hear. All right, thank you for your participation. Okay, well, it's about 21 minutes past the hour. I appreciate everyone's involvement. Bill Daly, Chris Gagney, Julie Lineberger, Mike Costco, and Ellen Cappy. Thanks so much. I appreciate your sharing your insights and thoughts. Hope folks found it helpful. If you have any questions, we do collect questions at BDCC-COVID-19-questions@brattleborodevelopment.com. So if you can submit to that email address, we'll try to answer your questions either during the week or at the next webinar. But I hope folks have a great weekend, and as Chris suggested, try to practice some self-care and try to relax a little bit. Have a great week. Thank you.